Super Bowl window and whether it's closed or not. Here's what he said.
I just feel like at any moment you could kick a window wide open. Like, that's how I feel. Sure, you need good players on your team. Yeah, but like you can find good players anywhere. And when you still have Nick Bosa under contract, Fred Warner under contract, Christian McCaffrey under contract, Trent Williams, like there's still plenty of talent on this roster.
I guess the faith is that John Lynch somehow is going to work this out, as he has. They've been very consistent in that regard, Dan. What do you think their top priority is to keep that Super Bowl window open?
Well, Hannah, their quarterback, Brock Purdy, is eligible for an extension for the first time this offseason, and they'll work on getting that extension done. Purdy's been the biggest bargain in the league as the final pick of the draft 3 years ago, but now he should get paid like one of the top quarterbacks, and that'll affect their budget moving forward. And you'll see them make decisions on guys like Trent Williams, right, who's getting older and whose contract is big. We'll see how long those guys can stick around. Deebo Samuel, one of their star wide receivers, they've given him permission to seek a trade, but probably they end up releasing him because it's a lot more impactful on their cap this year if they were to trade him than to release him. So there will be some turnover, but as Kittle said, the window should stay open as long as they have good players. I'm surprised George Kittle is a guy that would kick open a window. That never occurred to me before.
Oh, come on. The 49ers' priority this season will be signing Purdy to an extension. They currently have $25.6 million in projected cap space. They hold the 11th pick in the NFL draft, and they have some key defensive pieces who are entering free agency: Dre Greenlaw, Charvarius Ward, Taloa Hufanga, and also Jordan Mason, a restricted free agent. He filled in really well for Christian McCaffrey when he was injured, but of course McCaffrey really an irreplaceable talent. So Tim, Brock Purdy said he doesn't want any drama. He wants to be in camp. He wants to get this resolved. How big of an impact will his contract situation and the number beside it have on this team?
Yeah. Look, it'll be significant because, look, they've basically been paying nothing for a quarterback because of the contract that Purdy was on. So, look, it'll change things. At the same time, I think if you just look at the scenario and you think, look, they want Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy wants to be there. I actually don't think there would be some crazy free agent market, for Purdy. It's never going to get to that point anyway. So I think he's going to get paid like a starter. But this idea that he's going to reset the quarterback market, I actually don't believe that that's going to happen for Purdy. I think the team in some ways will take advantage of him because he basically hasn't made any money yet, and we'll get him under contract. And then at that point, I think what will happen is, look, they'll be operating just like most teams in the NFL are operating, and George Kittle's correct. There are other good players that are currently under contract in San Francisco, and I actually think the Niners end up being in pretty good shape.
Wow, but you think Brock Purdy might take a bit of a hometown discount. That's very interesting. I do want to move to the other side of the ball because when the Niners have been good, Sam, it's been that dominant defense. They have to get back to that identity. What should they be focused on?
Well, they should be focused on re-signing some of their free agents. We talked about Dre Greenlaw, who's an upcoming free agent. Talked about Hargrave on the inside, who's a free agent. Charvarius Ward, free agent. There are so many holes that are impending holes in this defense. And I get it. It's not the same defense that it was when DeMeco Ryans was the DC, even when Robert Saleh was the DC way back when. I get it. Saleh is back, but you need to get those weapons. Even Hufanga at safety, he's a free agent. And so you either need to re-sign some of these players and or restock in the draft. The great thing about San Francisco defensively is that there's so much talent. But oftentimes that talent, like we see on the offensive side, they're staying, at least they're under contract. The defensive side is starting to be outside of the contract. And so get these guys back under contract, get Greenlaw signed, or replace them quickly.
Yeah, I mean, their defense allowed their most points per game since 2018 when they finished 4-12. Their defense is a huge reason why they went to 4 conference championship games in 6 years.
Could the Bengals franchise wide receiver T. Higgins for the second year in a row? If they do, it'll cost them in excess of $26 million. And they still have Jamar Chase on the roster looking for a contract extension. It's unusual to pay 2 wide receivers at that level. The Eagles do it. The Dolphins do it. They're the only ones at this point. But the Bengals could, as I said with Darnold, kind of hold on to Higgins to try and work out a long-term deal with him. And if they can't, maybe get something for him in trade. The franchise tag would be a way to extend their window for doing those two things.
Dan, the Bengals are so fascinating because they signed Joe Burrow to a 5-year extension in 2023. Now, though, they have to keep all of these other stars coming off the receiving triple crown. You mentioned Jamar Chase entering the final year of his rookie deal. Then we have T. Higgins, an impending free agent, of course, played last season, as Dan mentioned, under the franchise tag. And then last season's sack leader, Trey Hendrickson, let's not forget about him. He's on the last year of his deal. So, Sam, with the Bengals expected to tag Higgins, how do you like that decision for the time being with everything else that they have to do?
Yeah, I love the decision for the time being, but the better decision is to tag him in order to sign him to a long-term deal. The reason why I say that is this. The Cincinnati Bengals can't compete for championships. They have the quarterback who can compete. They have a star receiver, triple crown winner. They have a defensive end who led the NFL in sacks. No, by the way, not to mention T. Higgins, who's proven who can be a number one receiver. Now, Joe Burrow has said that he's willing to renegotiate his contract in order to make room for his star players. We saw Tom Brady do that year in and year out. So if I'm the Cincinnati Bengals, it makes the most sense, sure, to temporarily franchise tag T. Higgins, but in order to sign him to a long-term deal, you have to compete with teams like the Baltimore Ravens, teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are a consistent threat. You have the weapons, keep them, especially when your quarterback is willing to sacrifice some of his contract.
Yeah, I agree with you, Sam, in terms of you want to keep the good players that you have on your football team, especially when you look at what you have to do in the AFC. And you do have a quarterback, in Joe Burrow that can get it done. The concern I would have for them is tagging him makes sense. And I do think, working to try to get a long-term deal makes sense. But I would say this too. You don't always have to wait until the guy's deal is up to work a long-term deal for him. And if you do, it's most likely going to always be more expensive if the guy can play, which T. Higgins can, which Jamar Chase can, which Trey Hendrickson can. And so before you start to, you look up, you're paying top of the market for every single one of these guys because you don't want to get ahead of the deal and extend a guy until the end of his contract. I just think when you do that, you just end up not being able to afford them. That's ultimately what happens. I think that's what's going to happen in Cincinnati. So it's a good plan. I just think it's a couple years late.
Time to sell your ride? Just go to CarMax.com, enter your info.
One of the problems, Tim, that Cincinnati has is that their contract structure, they don't guarantee any money outside of the first year. And that's part of the reason it's sometimes tough for them to get long-term deals done with guys that want that guarantee in year 2, year 3. Trey Hendrickson is another guy to watch, a defensive end that just led the league in sacks. He wasn't happy with his contract last offseason, didn't get the extension he was looking for. He has 1 year left on his deal, and he's probably going to be looking for, not probably, he's certainly going to be looking for a big money extension that pays him commensurate with a guy who leads the league in sacks. So the Bengals have issues on defense. They have a new defensive coordinator coming in, a new system to install. So they have to figure out their wide receiver situation, but they also have to figure out what they're going to do with Trey Hendrickson. And if he is going to not play for them, what they can get in return and how they can replace him.
Yeah, literally. And given that big picture, and we heard Joe Burrow commenting again on it, wanting to keep the band together. But Tim, given what you just heard from Graz, especially, how much sense does it really make for Cincinnati to commit all of that money on offense?
Well, look, I think it's smart. Just look at what happened in the Super Bowl. If you're good on the offense and defensive line, you can beat teams that, have good quarterbacks and good perimeter players. So it's not smart to build a 7-on-7 team when you have to play actual football. And so I do think allocating the money, not just, so heavy at quarterback and wide receiver, is smart. I want to just touch on something that Dan said that I think, is really important. T. Higgins gets franchised. He's talking about the guarantee on a 1-year deal. He's going to get $26 million if he signs the franchise tag. Then he would be a free agent.
Yep.
So, just for perspective, if you're T. Higgins, there's no shot that you're ever signing a contract extension that is not giving you probably around $60 million guaranteed over the first 2 years. And then after 2 years, you'd be a free agent, or you would want a third year onto that. So most guys that are looking for the money over a 3-year span, if you're T. Higgins with receivers making around $30 million a year, T. Higgins is going to want $90 million over the next 3 years, somewhere in that ballpark. Oh, by the way, Jamar Chase wants to reset the wide receiver market and should. So the idea of not guaranteeing money, beyond year one, it just, look, you're never going to be successful and you're never going to be able to